The courtroom was quiet, not because of respect, but because of confidence. The kind of icy, smug silence that only appears when someone thinks they've already won. The cameras weren't live, but everyone in the gallery knew the transcript of this hearing would go viral, especially with Kash Patel sitting at the defense table. It was supposed to be a routine federal review. A hearing designed to undermine a former Trump-era intelligence official, now turned media target, Kash Patel. The charges? Vague allegations of improper conduct, unauthorized disclosures, and undermining institutional trust. In truth, it was a political spectacle disguised as oversight. Presiding over it was Judge Rebecca Latimer, a rising star in the legal establishment. Ivy League educated, polished, politically connected, and known for her withering tone and zero tolerance for nonconformity. Kash Patel was the opposite. Direct, blunt, battle-tested. A man who'd fought on the front lines of DC's dirtiest intel wars. His reputation was controversial, but his supporters were loyal, and his enemies were loud. As the judge entered and sat down, she adjusted her glasses, scanned the room, and let out a tight, artificial chuckle. "Well, Mr. Patel," she said, eyes narrowing, "I must admit, when I read your background, I was surprised." Kash sat still, silent. "You've certainly taken an interesting path. Law clerk, DOJ, NSC, chief investigator, then back again, bouncing around like a ping-pong ball." She raised her eyebrows. "And now what? Spokesman for conspiracy podcasts." A few people chuckled behind their hands. The stenographer paused, unsure if she should type it as sarcasm or quote. Kash leaned forward slowly, not rattled, just ready. "With respect, Your Honor," he said calmly, "mocking my resume won't change the contents of the file I'm about to submit." The courtroom stilled. The judge raised an eyebrow. And what would that be? Kash reached into a thin black folder, pulled out one document and placed it on the table. "This is a signed memo," he said, "from a senior member of the National Security Council, dated 1 month before I left government service. It confirms a classified operation I was tasked with supervising, one you've ruled didn't exist." The judge scoffed. "You're not seriously introducing—" "I'm submitting it for the record," Kash interrupted, his voice sharp now, like a gavel of his own. "And if you deny it, I have 2 names and 1 timestamp that prove you either ignored the truth or buried it." The room went still. The prosecutor leaned forward, suddenly pale. The judge said nothing, because whatever was in that paper, she recognized it. And for the first time in her career, she wasn't sure she could laugh her way out. Judge Latimer stared at the document on the table like it was glowing. She didn't reach for it, didn't touch it. She just looked. The way someone looks at a ghost they never expected to meet. Kash Patel sat calmly, his fingers laced over the folder. "I'd recommend reading it aloud," he said, "because once it's in the record, the public will too." A buzz spread through the gallery. Reporters who had shown up expecting a procedural farce were now scrambling to check feeds, text their editors, and brace for a headline shift. The judge cleared her throat, her voice tighter now. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Patel. You've had multiple opportunities to introduce evidence before this point." "I was told this document was classified beyond scope," Kash replied, keeping his tone measured. "But that classification was lifted 2 weeks ago. Quietly, conveniently, and I'm betting your chambers never received that update." A whisper in the prosecutor's ear. The woman blanched, because it was true. The document, previously marked as top secret, had just been declassified, and Kash had brought the only known physical copy. Judge Latimer tried to recover. "You're playing a dangerous game with national security." "No, Your Honor," he said. "I'm ending one." Then he stood, slow, deliberate, and picked up the document. "If the court will not read it," he said, "I will." He unfolded the single page. "To Director of National Intelligence, from Deputy Counsel, National Security Council. Date, redacted. Subject, Strategic Dissemination Program Approval. Direct Oversight, assigned K. Patel." He paused. "This memo confirms my legal authority, not to leak, not to speculate, but to investigate and report on specific intelligence misappropriation related to international surveillance coordination. The very program this court has accused me of fabricating." He turned to face the gallery, and it names the senior counsel who authorized it. The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Latimer's knuckles had gone white, because the memo had one more thing. Kash read it out loud. All briefings and program brief notes to be cross-reviewed by J. Latimer, lead ethics liaison. Boom. The room exploded in whispers. Phones buzzed. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Judge Rebecca Latimer wasn't just mocking the program's existence. She was listed in the memo as a reviewing official, which meant she didn't forget. She lied. Kash folded the paper slowly. I don't care what you say about me, but you're not going to erase the work of patriots just because it's politically inconvenient. And with that, he slid the memo toward the bailiff. The judge didn't move. She couldn't. Because the story had just flipped. She wasn't the interrogator anymore. She was on trial. The second the paper slid across the courtroom floor into the bailiff's hands, the air changed. Not figuratively, literally. Phones vibrated. Journalists broke protocol, stepping out of their benches to whisper, to dial, to move. The gallery had been filled with people expecting to see Kash Patel cornered. Now they were watching a sitting federal judge being exposed, by name in an official memo she pretended didn't exist. Outside the courthouse, news vans were double parking. The memo's leaked contents were already online. Patel drops bombshell flashed across social feeds. Conservative commentators exploded with praise. Even left-leaning anchors paused with awkward confusion, unsure how to spin it. Inside, Judge Latimer had gone cold. Not angry, not commanding, just cornered. Court will take a 10-minute recess, she said suddenly, voice flat. Bailiff, seal the document, lock the gallery. She stood up and vanished behind her chamber's door without a glance. The moment the door shut, Kash exhaled and sat down. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because outside, the war was already underway. Inside her private chambers, Judge Latimer paced. Her clerk sat silently, waiting for instructions, while the judge grabbed her private phone, not the court line, the one only a few political allies had. She dialed. A man answered. He brought it, she said. Silence on the line. The memo? Yes. Pause. And you're named? A beat. He read it, she whispered. The voice was low, sharp. You told me it was buried. I thought it was. You're in the memo as a reviewer, Rebecca. You swore under oath you'd never seen it. I know. The voice dropped lower. If that memo gets authenticated in the record, we can't stop the fallout. It's over. Click. She stood in the quiet, staring at the blank wall in front of her, because the one thing she never planned for was Kash Patel having proof. Back in the courtroom, murmurs rose. The media was locked out, but the court stenographer had already messaged friends. The story was out. And Kash? He opened his folder again, because the memo wasn't the only page, and this hearing was just getting started. The courtroom had fallen into a tense, buzzing silence, the kind you only feel after a bomb goes off, and everyone's waiting to see if there's another. The gallery was locked, cameras banned, reporters hushed. But that didn't stop the story from racing through the internet like wildfire. Outside, national media networks had parked satellite trucks. Inside, Kash Patel sat quietly with the same black folder in front of him. The one that had just shattered the court's narrative and revealed Judge Latimer as a named official in a memo she swore under oath didn't exist. Now she was still in chambers. And Kash? He was still turning pages. Because the next one was worse. Much worse. When Judge Latimer returned, she walked in like she had just stepped off a cliff and was pretending there was still ground beneath her feet. Her robe hung heavier. Her tone was flatter. Her words clipped and short. The court will resume. She tried to look neutral, professional, but Kash was ready. Your Honor, he said, voice low and steady, before we continue, I'd like to enter one more item into the record. Her jaw twitched. Is it another document? It is. He pulled a second paper from the folder, this one with handwritten notes. He slid it to the clerk. This is a draft email, recovered through FOIA, written by a member of your ethics team 3 months before this hearing. The judge's eyes narrowed. Your point? Kash didn't look at her. He just read. We'll need to shape the narrative before Patel's side even files. Push the story about unauthorized leaks. If we delay the declassification memo, we can keep him boxed in. Judge L will be on our side. She's already briefed. The courtroom gasped. The quote hit like a shotgun blast. Judge Latimer's expression cracked, ever so slightly. A twitch in her eyebrow, a sudden intake of breath. But she said nothing, because there was nothing she could say. Kash continued, briefed. Before I filed anything, before I submitted evidence, while this courtroom was still being prepared. He turned to the gallery. Which means this wasn't a hearing. It was a setup. The outcome was written before the first objection was ever raised. He let the silence speak. Then, and the judge who laughed at my career was already part of the plan to destroy it. Absolute stillness. Even the court security guards were frozen. The clerk, visibly shaken, looked to the judge. "Your Honor, should we?" But she didn't answer, because the entire courtroom now realized this wasn't about Kash Patel's integrity. It was about hers. The second document sent shockwaves through the courtroom. It wasn't just the content. It was the handwriting, the signature at the bottom. It belonged to one of Judge Latimer's own senior ethics advisors. The clerk looked like she'd seen a ghost. The bailiff glanced to the gallery, hand hovering near his radio. Even the prosecution team, which had been so aggressive earlier, now sat stiff, silent, and very still, like passengers on a bus that just veered off a cliff and realized there was no driver. Kash Patel didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply folded the document and looked up at the judge. "Would Your Honor like to recuse yourself now, or shall we continue exposing the rest of this operation one document at a time?" Judge Latimer clenched her jaw. "That document," she began, but stopped, because she knew what was coming next. She didn't get the chance to finish. A hand shot up from the gallery. "I'd like to be heard." Everyone turned. It was a woman seated in the third row, mid-40s, conservative grey suit. Her badge read, OIG, Office of the Inspector General. The judge's face paled. Kash tilted his head. "Go ahead," he said calmly. The woman stood. "My name is Elaine Marcus. I'm with the OIG's Whistleblower Protection Unit. I'm here on official business, and I have a sworn affidavit in my bag, signed and notarized, stating that Judge Latimer was briefed twice on the surveillance suppression memo after it was declassified and deliberately failed to update the case record." The courtroom erupted. Not just whispers, noise, gasps, shouts, scrambling from press contacts in the back, security stepping forward, unsure whether to intervene or stand down. But it wasn't over. Elaine reached into her bag and pulled out a yellow envelope. "I also have documentation showing that 2 members of this court's ethics office communicated with DOJ personnel to coordinate the optics of Mr. Patel's disciplinary charges prior to any filing being made." That was it. Judge Latimer slumped slightly in her chair. The cameras may have been banned from the courtroom, but the internet didn't care. Reporters had already started posting live updates. Breaking. Whistleblower confirms federal judge coordinated case against Kash Patel. Kash Patel vindicated. Documents suggest Judge Latimer misled court. Scandal. Whistleblower interrupts live hearing with evidence of judicial misconduct. And then came the chant from outside the courthouse. Distant but unmistakable. "Release the memos." "Release the memos." Judge Latimer finally spoke, or tried to. "We will recess until further." "No," Kash said, standing. "No more recesses. No more redactions. If this court won't expose what happened." He held up one final document. "I will." As the judge's voice wavered mid-sentence, Kash Patel stood calmly, holding up the final page in his folder like a man holding a detonator. "This," he said, "is the final piece." Judge Latimer didn't speak. She couldn't. Because she recognized the page from across the room. It was a digital extract. Email metadata, clearance tags, and one damning subject line, delay declass, maintain perception of unauthorized leak, target K. Patel. Dated 3 days after the declassification order, sent to an internal DOJ chain that included 2 names currently redacted from the official court record. And it was signed off by an ethics liaison using Judge Latimer's internal reference code. Kash looked at her, steady, unblinking. "You didn't just lie, Judge Latimer. You participated." The gallery buzzed, but he didn't let it swell. "Which is why I'm not submitting this last page to the court." A collective gasp. Judge Latimer leaned forward. "You're refusing to enter evidence?" "I'm doing what the courts refused to," he said, turning toward the gallery. "I'm taking it straight to the people." He turned to the bailiff. "This hearing is no longer about truth. It's about containment, and I won't participate in my own censorship." With that, he pulled out his phone, tapped a single button. Live, the paper they tried to bury. Posted by Kash Patel, verified. Within seconds, over 100,000 viewers were tuned in. By the time he reached the steps outside the courthouse, the number had surged past 500,000. Kash stood on the steps, flanked by no security, no team, just the facts, and a voice. "Today," he said into the live feed, "a federal courtroom proved it's no longer a place for justice, but for narrative control. So I brought the documents they refused to acknowledge, the same ones they tried to hide. And now you can read them all. Every line, every redaction, every signature they swore didn't exist." Inside the courtroom, the judge's clerk screamed, "He leaked classified." But the OIG whistleblower calmly corrected her. "It's already been cleared. He just did what the Constitution told him to." By nightfall, the document had been downloaded over 10 million times. Verified, confirmed, shared across political lines, and the phrase "he showed one paper that ended hers" became more than a headline. It became a movement. By morning, Washington wasn't just reacting, it was unraveling. Kash Patel's live stream had detonated like a digital bomb across the Beltway. Not a rumor, not a tweet, not a whisper. A primary source document, unredacted, verified, and shared by the very man the system tried to silence. Over 30 million views. Major outlets scrambled. Some tried to downplay the revelation, calling it a misleading interpretation. Others went silent altogether, waiting for permission to speak. But it didn't matter. The people had already read it. The emails, the signatures, the phrases like delay perception, coordinate narrative, and worst of all, Judge L briefed. Pamphlets, podcasts, live streams, and Substack articles popped up overnight, dissecting every line. Even centrists and left-leaning independents couldn't look away. If this had happened to anyone else, they'd be gone. But she's a judge. "We used to say the truth will come out in court. Now it comes out despite the court." He didn't raise his voice. He just raised the evidence. In the Capitol, lawmakers were briefed in emergency meetings. In the DOJ, internal review panels were called with zero media coverage. And in the federal courthouse where it all began, Judge Rebecca Latimer cancelled court. No notice, no explanation. Her chambers were sealed. Her assistant submitted a medical leave filing. But everyone knew what it was: retreat. Kash Patel, meanwhile, didn't slow down. He went on a string of independent media appearances, not to gloat, but to explain, with the calm of a man who knew he had receipts and knew the country had seen them. This isn't about vindication. It's about exposure, and it's just the beginning. He pulled up new files during each interview, explained context, broke it down in plain language. Transparency, uncut. That's what made it so dangerous. Not just that he had the evidence, but that he trusted the public to see it. Back in Washington, an anonymous staffer leaked a text from inside DOJ leadership. "If this spirals any further, we won't be able to contain it. We need to shift focus fast." But they were too late, because truth moves faster than spin. And for the first time in years, the American people weren't just listening, they were believing. The document was just 4 paragraphs long, no signature, no press conference, no camera, but it was real. A leak from within the federal court's administrative office confirmed it. Judge Rebecca Latimer had submitted her resignation, effective immediately. Personal reasons, the letter said. But the world knew better. The final paragraph of the internal memo read, "The environment surrounding this courtroom no longer allows for the clarity and impartiality necessary to perform the duties of this position." Translation: caught, cornered, gone. News outlets ran the story at a whisper at first, careful not to give it oxygen. But the internet roared. She resigned. Patel was right. Paper that ended her. Even lawmakers began issuing statements, some cautiously distancing themselves from early conclusions, others with open condemnation. "If a federal judge knowingly suppressed evidence, we need a full investigation." But Kash Patel? He didn't gloat. He didn't post a victory tweet. He didn't take a victory lap on talk shows. Instead, he released a 2-minute video, just him, seated at a desk, speaking directly to the camera. This wasn't about ending a career. It was about ending a lie. "I didn't fight for revenge. I fought so that the truth could walk into a courtroom and not be laughed out of it." He held up the paper one last time. This wasn't just a document. It was a promise that no matter how deep they bury it, truth can still rise. The video went viral, not because it was flashy, because it was honest, and it reminded people that justice doesn't come from title, robe, or power. It comes from proof. For the first time in years, Kash Patel's name wasn't a lightning rod. It was a lighthouse. The man who had been mocked by elites, dismissed by media, and dragged into court for doing his job, had won. Not by shouting, not by spin, but by showing one paper, and it ended everything. 3 weeks after Judge Latimer's resignation, the U.S. House Oversight Committee called a special hearing. It wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented, because for the first time in modern history, a congressional panel would examine how a sitting federal judge may have coordinated with executive agencies to suppress evidence and target a private citizen, using the judicial bench as a weapon. And at the center of it all sat one name, Kash Patel. The room was different now. No smirking prosecutors, no stacked rulings, no scoffing judges in designer robes, just rows of elected officials, a full public gallery, C-SPAN cameras, and one man sitting in front of a microphone, calm as ever. This time, he was the one being questioned. Only now, they were finally listening. The chairman of the committee adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Patel, can you confirm that this is the original document you submitted into the federal court record the day of your disciplinary hearing?" Kash nodded. "Yes, sir. One of 4 total documents." "And were any of these documents created by you?" "No, sir," Kash said. "All originated from within the intelligence or judicial ethics community. I simply brought what they tried to hide." The room was dead silent. Then the ranking member, usually hostile toward conservative witnesses, leaned forward. "Mr. Patel, are you telling us that a sitting federal judge knowingly ruled against you while holding prior knowledge that your claims were based in truth?" Kash looked him in the eye. "Yes," murmurs in the room. He continued, "This wasn't a legal dispute. It was a message, a signal sent to anyone in Washington who might try to speak outside the lines. But when the truth became inconvenient, they didn't just dismiss me. They erased the paper trail. I brought that paper back." The committee chair set his pen down. "Mr. Patel, I think I speak for many in this chamber when I say you've exposed more than one person. You've exposed a system." Kash nodded once. "I didn't do it alone. The American people saw it. They verified it. And they carried it farther than any courtroom ever would." Outside, the crowd watching on giant screens cheered. In the hallways of Congress, whispers turned to headlines, and inside that room, the once dismissed voice of a former Intel official now carried the weight of something more than reputation. It carried the weight of proof. The hearing ended not with a bang, but with a hush. The kind of silence you only hear after something sacred gets broken and rebuilt. Kash Patel stood up from the witness chair, adjusted his coat, nodded once to the committee, and left the room without applause, without spectacle, and without a single word to the cameras waiting outside. Because it was never about him. It was about the document, the lie it exposed, and the truth it forced out of the shadows. Outside the Capitol, thousands had gathered, not for a rally, not for politics, but for a kind of civic moment that hadn't been felt in years. Homemade signs, folded flags, people holding printed copies of the paper like it was a badge. One said, "We don't need the court to clap. We just needed it to blink." Back at home, Kash went quiet. No press tour, no book deal, no social media circus, just a short video. Sitting at the same desk where he recorded his post-hearing message, he looked into the camera one final time. The truth doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the one who brings the receipts. I brought mine. You shared them. And that's why we won. He smiled, then reached down, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it gently on the desk. "Inside here are documents I never had to release. I hope I never have to. But if one day they try this again, with someone quieter, someone with less protection, open it." He looked into the lens, not as a political figure, but as a citizen. This isn't the end of the fight. It's the beginning of memory. Remember what they did. Remember how they denied it. Remember how one paper ended their silence. He paused. Then softly, "I'm done talking. Now it's your turn." Fade to black. In the months that followed, Judge Latimer's resignation triggered a massive investigation into judicial ethics protocols. 3 federal officials stepped down quietly. The phrase, "he showed one paper that ended hers," became a symbol of truth prevailing over power, printed on bumper stickers in classrooms across podcast and protest signs. But Kash, he kept his promise. No victory tour, no ego, just silence. Because the point had never been to win a headline, it was to return the truth to the people who had been denied it.